Welcome to License to Spend with Tim Whisler from the Whisler Agency. Immerse yourself in expert insights on financial strategies that will empower you to confidently navigate your way to retirement freedom. Join us on this journey towards financial confidence. It's time to take control of your financial future.
Are you on top of your money situation? And ladies, I'm talking specifically to you. Now, whether you're married or single, you should know the state of your finances and you should have a plan for retirement. Welcome back to License to Spend with Tim Whisler. I'm Patrice Sikora. So, Tim, this episode, you want to focus on women and the importance of staying informed.
That's right, Patrice. I'm really happy that we're having this conversation today. In apologies to everybody, we should have done this a long time ago, but I really hope that our content today is just, provides some help to those who are listening in.
So talk to me. Why do women face unique challenges in retirement, as if I didn't know? And what makes our retirement needs different from those of men?
Sure. I kind of thought maybe we should switch seats for today, and have you answer. But, I just kind of thought, in my years of experience and as many as, wonderful single ladies that we have as clients, I kind of thought this would be kind of a good thing for us to touch on. And so as I was doing some research with this, it really comes down, I think, at a minimum for two reasons. It comes down to wages and longevity. Obviously, wages, as we know, for whatever reason that it is, I can't explain it. And I certainly don't. I wish it was different, but women earn a little bit less than men do, which means they earn, they save less over their lifetimes. Plus, also too, they spend more time out of the workplace.
That's right.
They're at home raising the kids, getting the kids to school and all that, and so therefore, and sometimes too, then you have the transition. Now they transition from raising the kids, possibly going back into the workforce for a while, but then they have to turn around and maybe care for a parent or two. So sometimes the wages can be offset because of time out of the workforce. And then you look at the second reason, longevity. The ladies have, longer life expectancies. So therefore there's more years that needed to be, to fund a retirement. And also can be, higher potential healthcare and long-term care costs, in retirement. So I really kind of think that's kind of where we really kick things off as far as, ladies have some challenges, with these two reasons here at a minimum.
And let me just jump in there. The career thing is so important, the amount of time in the workforce and the career you choose, because very often women are in lower paying careers. Maybe not so much now, but it used to be that they were the lower paying careers.
That's absolutely right. That's exactly right. So we kind of take all that into culmination because, we're going to talk about here in just a second, but, the less that we're earning, the less we can potentially save. Therefore, the less we have in an IRA, a Roth IRA, a 401k, and also the less that we're potentially contributing to Social Security as well.
All right. So what misconceptions have you found among women when it comes to their financial futures and mistakes they make when planning for retirement?
This was a tough question. As we were planning this out, I really want to make sure we touched in on this because I don't want to come across as being judgmental. That is not our intent here. Just from what I've experienced over this, and I look specifically, for married couples. As is the case with most households, there's usually one of the two kind of sit in the driver's seat for this topic, which is perfectly fine. Right? It's the same way in my household. Rhonda has no interest in any of this stuff. She's just like, well, do whatever you need to do, but I'm always trying to just, drop little nuggets of information for her. And, I just want to encourage ladies, if you're listening in and your husband kind of takes ownership of the overall financial plan, don't entirely rely upon his guidance. Give yourself an opportunity to kind of, go up that learning curve. I realize that we as humans tend to shy away from a topic if we don't understand it, or we don't feel as though we're competent in speaking the language. So we tend to kind of ignore it a little bit. Well, I think that's kind of a dangerous thing to do, especially when your financial situation, could impact you sometime down the road. So I think, I recommend that, I would simply say some misconceptions would be, don't just entirely, rely upon your husband's guidance or your spouse's guidance. I think another one out there is sometimes we underestimate the effect of inflation. How that can lower our purchasing power over time. And Patrice, we've talked about this before on previous episodes. We've talked about that rule of 72. Trying to figure out how long will account double if we earn X amount of rate of return? Well, we can flip the tables a little bit and say, well, what if, for example, just to keep the math simple, what if we're in a 3% inflation rate? Right? That'd be nice if we were back in 3%, but someday we will maybe. But 3 goes into 72 24 times. So that basically means that in 24 years, your purchasing power will basically be cut in half. And if we think about how long we may spend time in retirement, that's something we have to think about. Another one as well as I've heard this before. I really don't, I really don't want to worry about investing. I just need to save. Okay, well, that's again, if somebody's kind of taken the reins for that responsibility, I think it's even more imperative that we kind of give ourselves an opportunity to understand what that spouse knows, so that we understand a little bit more about the importance of making sure that we're investing properly and also trying to save so that we can keep pace with inflation later on down the road.
And even going back to the very, very simple things, I don't know if this happens much anymore, but you used to hear stories about women who were widowed and didn't even know how to write a check to pay a
Yeah.
bill, had no clue on how to pay a bill.
That's right. I mean, I've heard those stories as well. It's okay that when we, in a partnership, in a household of husband and wife, we kind of share in the responsibilities. But man, I just firmly believe it's so critical that especially with finances, that there needs to be it needs to be not just one person. I think it needs to be a team effort,
Mhm.
because of the fact that all of a sudden now we might be forced into something unexpectedly. That's either through, the passing of a husband, or even worse, just, going through a divorce. And I remember the very first time, my current account manager for this local publication reached out to me that I advertise in, and she said, I hear your podcast, I hear your radio advertising, I love the content. She goes, you would really be able to help a lot of single ladies, because she goes, I'm one of them. And it was not something I chose, but I was kind of forced into being a single woman. And I didn't know any of this stuff. And she goes, so I'm still trying to go up that learning curve. And it really hit home to me. I felt, I felt horrible for her, but it really resonated for the fact that we need to touch on the subject a little bit more and provide some content for some from ladies and encourage them, before they're actually possibly forced into a situation they didn't choose. They kind of understand a little bit about how to speak that language.
What can someone do? What are the first steps they can take if they think about finance and they think it's just too much for me and they get overwhelmed?
Right. And I tell you, it's so easy to do that, because again, it's a foreign language for folks. So I kind of like to break it down from the standpoint of let's just start the conversation with a pleasant subject. For example, what would you like to do in retirement? Especially if we're talking that we're getting close to retirement, what is that? What are those days going to look like? What is going to fill your days with purpose? So again, we're just kind of starting with basically a blank canvas, right? What do you want to do with your time? Well, I want to do some traveling. Okay, what type of traveling? Well, I want to do some volunteering. What type of volunteering? What type of activities might involve some expenses? And if so, have those expenses been included in your budget? So let's first of all start with, what does retirement look like? Then the next thing we need to do is, now we need to kind of start breaking down your current financial portfolio, talking about things you know the answers to. What is your income? What are your assets? I mean, obviously, this all can be
Mhm.
retrieved from statements. Maybe some debts. Are we still paying down a car payment? Are we paying off a mortgage? What about Social Security? If we haven't turned on Social Security yet, let's grab that statement, so we can kind of start breaking this down and trying to take away that feeling of overwhelming feeling of simply starting with those numbers. And then with some help of, again, a retirement income planner, we can go through and say, okay, if this is what you want to do in retirement, how you want to spend your time, and for those activities that are going to require an expense, let's kind of set up that spending plan, right? I don't always like to use the word budget; it sometimes slips out, but let's call it a spending plan, for lack of a better term.
It's a nasty word, Tim.
It is a nasty word, and that's not what we want to do. It's not like we're wearing golden handcuffs. We're like, oh well, Tim said I have to only spend this much.
This is Tim's budget for me, and I have to follow it.
That's right. So I think if we kind of start there, I think we can talk about subjects that we know the answers to. What do we want to do in retirement? What are the current assets? And then we can kind of build from there, build from the spending plan. And then if we need to maybe reposition some assets, then we can start talking through, okay, this is what this investment is. This is what this tax classification means. Because at the end of the day, Patrice, as you and I both know, the ROI in retirement is all about the reliability of income.
Mhm.
And it all starts with this conversation. And that way, I think if we start there, just a very simplistic way of looking at this, we can hopefully address the foreign language and take away that overwhelming feeling.
Women you've worked with, Tim, do they accept and buy into this learning and this budgeting? We'll use the word.
Yes, I would say in general they do, because of the fact of, again, I can think of, well, in fact, just case in point, since the last time we got together and recorded our last episode, I've been hired by two separate single ladies. And it's quite an honor because both of them were very complimentary on our podcast. Both of them said, "Hey, I was able to catch your TV show." We talked through that, so they watched a few episodes. And then once they came in, just as the case with everybody who now comes in, if they would like to take a copy of my book with them, by all means, they can take a copy and go through that. And it was just really, really encouraging that both of them shared almost the same sentiment the second time we got together. So the second time I got together with the one lady and the second time I got together with the other lady. They both were just like, you know what, that you just brought up some things I hadn't really thought about before. But it was good because I feel better about where I'm
Absolutely.
at.
Absolutely.
And so that was really, really encouraging me because again, that's what we're all about. We're just trying to provide information, share some resources, and bring a sense of empowerment that, you know what, it's okay. I can do this. I can understand this. And I can just go at a pace because I've got somebody walking right alongside me to help me. And that's what we're here to do.
Now, a lot of people may shy away from doing this, but the earlier you start, how can that help change the outcome, especially for women, because of the longevity issue, among other things?
Absolutely. I remember years and years ago, the way my office was set up, I would have client meetings right here at my desk. So that's obviously not today because now I can have my desk look whatever I want it to look like, be as quote unquote organized as I want it to be, and have meetings in a conference room. But back then, that day, I had a framed 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that said, "Waiting to save is expensive." And it just showed the value of what can happen with that eighth wonder of the world, compound interest.
Right.
So again, again, we can't go back and change history. So like I share with everybody, don't beat yourself up. We all could have done something different and better back in the day. That's okay. Let's talk about present. But yes, we really need to make sure that we have, access to some IRA accounts. If we're still working, be sure to take advantage of 401k contributions. If your company that you work for offers a match, and if your budget can handle it, by all means, at least contribute up to the match. On a separate note, if your company offers you access to a Roth 401k, for the love of the Lord, please take advantage of the Roth 401k. We don't need to put more dollars into a tax deferred buckets because I'm sure if we're all following the rules, we have more than enough dollars in that tax deferred bucket. We need to create some tax-free, income for down the road. Again, and as we age, when we hit that magical milestone of 50, the IRS allows us to play catch up. So for example, like if you're putting funds into a 401k, as of us recording this here in 2025, you can contribute up to $23,500 a year for the 401k. That's the max the IRS allows you to do that. But if you're 50 or over, they allow you to put another $7,500 in. So again, we want to go back to that B word, the budget, making sure we're not putting too much into a bucket and leaving ourselves, strapped for cash to pay our
Mhm.
day-to-day expenses. Then you think about also too, if we want to set up a Roth IRA or our own IRA account. Again, if certain qualifications are met, I think it's good for us to at least start today, leverage the dollars that we have access to, and start building those retirement accounts. Because again, Patrice, we were talking about this before we jumped on the air, how fast time passes,
Oh, yeah.
and we
Oh,
don't
yeah.
get those days back.
No, no, you don't. Some of these are great savings tips, but Tim, do you have anything more here? Savings strategies that women should focus on?
I want to make sure that, yes, absolutely. We want to make sure that, if there is earned income in the household, we want to make sure that there's a spousal IRA. So what I mean by that is, let's say between husband and wife, the husband's, going out there, he's working, he's the one who's generating the revenue, and the wife is staying home as a homemaker, raising the kids, taking care of the bills and all of that. That's the household I grew up in. My dad worked for CAT. My mom stayed at home and raised my younger sister and I. Applying that type of a household to today, obviously it's a little bit more rare because things are so expensive. Sometimes it requires both spouses to be in the workforce.
Mhm.
But I just want to make sure that everybody in that, my belief, Patrice, is that both spouses need to have their own IRA accounts. We need to be funding them as best that we can. Ladies definitely need to be funding a Roth IRA, an IRA. If they're working, a 401k, ideally a Roth 401k. Making sure that you have dollars in your own accounts separate from a spouse. That doesn't mean we have to handle our finances completely different, but that's what an IRA is. An IRA is an individual retirement
Retirement
account.
account. Yeah.
So therefore, if we want to commingle our funds, some spouses share the dollars together and budget that way. Some spouses keep their dollars separate. That's perfectly fine. But making sure at least we have some dollars in our own names, I think is very critical, especially like we said before, for the fact that ladies can outlive us and sometimes earn a little bit less. So we want to make sure that we put a little bit more of a priority on making sure that we fund our own individual retirement accounts.
Social Security, Tim.
Here we
How
go.
can women maximize their retirement benefits, optimize their options? Social Security is such a it's a strange animal.
It truly is. Well said. It is. I tell you, we could talk for days on this thing. We'll probably have an entire
And we have.
podcast on it.
We
Yes, we have.
have.
That's right. I just think it's just imperative. I am not of the philosophy that we have to maximize our Social Security. I'm of the philosophy we need to optimize it. It's a big, big difference between the two
Mhm.
of them. It hits home differently. It's just like when I was just referring back to the two single ladies who just hired me. We talked about they're both working. One's actually getting ready to retire. The other one's going to work for a couple more years. Neither one of us turned on Social Security yet. But when we came to this topic for both of them, they both had completely different outlooks on Social Security.
Hmm.
So my point is, with each household that I encounter, if we have not turned on Social Security yet, we want to walk through our options. What I mean by that, it all starts with based upon our year of birth, that determines our full retirement age. Let's start right there. So you grab that statement, and if you're born in 1960 or later, your full retirement age is 67. So therefore, let's start there on the chart. Now, let's say that we're having the conversation and you're going to celebrate your 62nd birthday. Well, you now know you're eligible to turn on Social Security as early as 62. But sit down for this, you're going to take a 30% hit off of your benefit if you turn it on that early. Now, is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It just really depends upon household by household. So I just think that we need to start with that, understanding that what is our benefit and when's the optimal time to turn that on. So when it comes to husband and wife, so I'm going to talk back to the married ladies here for a second. If we're following the traditional analogy where the man has earned more income than we have, therefore his Social Security benefit is going to be higher than ours, than the ladies. You go into retirement together side by side. You elect to turn on your Social Security benefits at the optimal time. Again, we won't get into that topic today, but you both turn on Social Security. Then, unfortunately, we have to talk about what happens to the surviving spouse.
Mhm.
One spouse passes away, right? So at that point, the lower of the two benefits goes away, the higher of the two benefits remains. So let's just keep the math simple. Husband's making $3,000 a month in Social Security. His wife is earning $2,000 a month. Does not matter who passes away, that higher the benefit will remain for the surviving spouse. But here's my concern. Patrice, we just lost $24,000 of
Exactly.
income coming in.
Exactly.
Where do we replace it? What do we do?
Yeah.
So my whole point is when I'm talking to married, husband and wife, it's very interesting how this is such an emotional decision for a lot of people. I paid into this thing for decades. I want to get my money out of it. I'm concerned about Social Security, having to reduce benefits in 2032, whatever year they're talking about. I want to get to my money now because if I take it out now, I can invest it. There's all kinds of very valid, opinions on that. My concern is that we want to optimize it, especially for the fact that the higher of the two benefits is going to be that second to die pension, the surviving spouse's pension. So I just think it's so critical that we understand that and try to make that election decision with a little more logic as opposed to emotion. And that's a hard thing to do. And I understand that. That's why, again, people can kind of use me as that sounding board, for example, because again, I'm the one who's going to bring the logic into it by simply saying, okay, you've brought the statements to me from our conversation. Let's implement it in the software and let's look at the numbers. What makes sense? For ladies out there who are single, maybe because of becoming a widow, the death of a spouse, or they went through a divorce. There are ways in which we can possibly, realize some benefits from our ex-husband or from our spouse who passed away. I think of the story. I talked about this in my book. Husband and wife came and met with me. This was goodness. I was thinking about this before we started today. I think it was around 2016 I met them for the very first time. And and I still work with her today. But long story short, they came in and met with me. He had an old 401k. They wanted to kind of move it somewhere, put it to work for themselves, and have that ready for retirement. Well, unfortunately, life had a different plan for him, and he contracted a very aggressive cancer and shortly thereafter passed away. Now she's instantly forced into this world of having all this decision on her shoulders. So now instead of our conversations being between her and her husband and me, now our conversations are with her son, her daughter, and son-in-law. Now we're walking her up this learning curve. So my point is, through our planning, we had optimized her Social Security by saying, go ahead and receive his Social Security benefit as you being a widow. Therefore, she can defer her primary benefit and let that grow. Because as we've talked before, if you defer your Social Security primary benefit past your full retirement age, every year until 70, it grows by 8%.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, we were able to kind of implement that into the overall plan for her. She worked for a few more years, and then we were starting to bring in some withdrawals from her savings account. And then at 70, we basically were able to flip from a widow benefit to a spousal benefit. So, I know there's a lot of, details that go around that, but basically that's what we talk about. Social Security, like you said, is a big animal. There's a lot of moving parts to it. Let's optimize it and making sure it's a good fit for everybody that's involved.
And make sure if you have questions, you go to somebody like Tim who has some answers. Or if he doesn't have the answer, Tim, you've got wonderful resources. We've had people on who have been your guests who know this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate that because, in fact, since our last podcast, I came across a unique Social Security situation, and sure enough, I reached out to Beth. She was on the podcast, and she was quick to respond, and she provided the clarity instantly because, again, she has 37 years of experience at Social Security. That's a good resource.
When's she going to retire?
Exactly right. Yeah, I hope not. I don't bring it up because I don't want to encourage her. So,
all right, Tim. Research shows 80% of women will die single.
Wow.
So we talked a little bit about Social Security, but how else can women protect themselves financially if they do outlive their spouse?
We touched on it a little bit earlier. I just think it's so critical to be involved in the financial conversations, right? It doesn't mean we have to go out there and study and watch a bunch of YouTube videos or TikTok videos on what all this stuff means. If a husband and wife are working with an advisor, attend the annual reviews. If you're not already do that, I encourage you to do that. That's just a good thing to do. Ask questions, understand it. It's okay to not understand everything there is to know about this foreign language. I think that's important. I think number two, a lot of times when I'm sitting down with husband and wife, one or both of them will say something about, well, I'm concerned about if I'm the one left behind. Maybe there's not enough, why are we concerned? Is it because maybe the pension gets changed? Maybe the survivorship of the pension is 50% as opposed to the full benefit. What about Social Security? What about retirement assets? I mean, so my point is we will walk them through an analysis. And there have been times, it's not too often, but there have been times where we'll talk about life insurance. Maybe we need to implement a plan for a little bit, just in case if that situation would arise, making sure that surviving spouse, if she outlives her husband, as statistics may indicate that might be possible, we want to make sure that we've got plenty of funds to get her through her longevity and through her retirement years.
I love the way you said ask questions because knowledge is so empowering. You may not think you understand it. Ask the question and it may become clear. And if it isn't clear, ask a question again. Keep going. That's what the advisor is there for.
Absolutely. And it's that whole adage of, we don't know what we don't know. So just kind of be curious. It's just like, okay, well, how do I protect my account from losing money? How much is this going to cost me? When can I get to my money? What happens if the market goes down? What happens if my husband passes away? What are my options? I to your point, Patrice, that is so well said. And I think that's just a great thing for us to be mindful of. Be curious. Ask the questions. There are no dumb questions. There are always good questions because if we don't understand it, now we can ramp ourselves up that learning curve because as soon as one question gets answered, 9 times out of 10, two more questions now pop up.
Right. Right.
And that's how we go up the learning curve. So yes, I cannot reiterate and emphasize your statement as enough. Let's just ask a lot of questions and give ourselves more information.
Are there any other things that you specifically do to help women plan for retirement, Tim?
Not really, probably more than what we kind of already talked about. I just think that, we're able to share our resources. I get a tremendous number of compliments on the income planning software that we use. And like I tell everybody, I can brag about it because I didn't write it. I just simply share it. But I tell you, having that type of a vehicle, especially just again, since it's fresh on my mind, one of the ladies who just hired me, I was in the pool of 4 different advisors. And she told me that the first time we got together, and I commended her on that. I said, that's a very wise thing to do. I said, you want to be interviewing a multitude of professionals because you're going to get a multitude of different types of
Mm-hmm.
recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it's going to create curiosity. Well, why did this guy say this? And why did this guy say? And it was very interesting that we came back with our second conversation and we started to go through the initial analysis that I had prepared for her. She had shared with me, she says, Tim, she's pointing to the monitors because in my conference room, I have my laptop connected to a pretty good size smart TV. And it's just basically an extension of my computer.
Mm-hmm.
And up there on the screen, we have got the crown jewel of the report, which is the retirement tab. And
Yay.
that's right. That's the crown jewel. That's what we're working for. And it basically just outlines year by year, starting with our current year of whenever retirement's going to be. If that's this year, then it shows 2025. If it's in 3 years, it'll start with 2028. The point of it is that very simplified screen brings in our income, shows our net expenses, and shows our assets year by year balances with some variables obviously built in, some conservative rates of return, some average inflation numbers for our expenses. But it's just interesting, Patrice, to answer your question, so many people have complimented us on how great of a tool that is. It paints the picture. And I just think specifically for ladies who again who are walking this journey by themselves, they have to shoulder this entire burden all by themselves. Being able to provide a resource that can maybe give them the opportunity just to be able to take a breath, for them to see the numbers and say, "Man, I am going to be okay." That's very empowering, and I just love to share that with folks because of the fact that again, just because it's a foreign language, you don't speak it all the time, doesn't mean we have to be overwhelmed or intimidated by it. And that's why one of the resources that I'm so proud to share with our clients, and it just really has resonated with a lot of our lady clients, time in and time out.
Just to paraphrase, you might say a picture is worth $1,000.
That's right. That's exactly right. At a minimum.
All right. Is there one action every woman listening today, or someone listening who has a woman in their life whom they love, can take today to help improve her financial future?
I think if we kind of go back through and summarize everything we just kind of shared here previously, I'd say, kind of conduct a financial checkup. Know your numbers. Let's start there. Grab some statements. Look at your numbers. Look at your expenses. Grab your bank accounts. Grab your favorite cup of tea or lemonade, whatever it is you want to drink throughout the day. And let's look back at the previous 3 months of expenses on our bank account. Get a good idea of where our dollars are going. Utilities, Amazon, cell phones, all of that. Let's account for all of that. And just start with that very simplified spending plan. We start there. And then we can start kind of peeling back the layers and now dipping our toe into the waters of maybe some topics we're not as familiar with. Well, what's the difference between a 401k and an IRA?
And
How do I move? And the Roth,
Don't
exactly.
forget the Roth there. Yeah.
The Roth. How do I move dollars from that forever tax into the never tax? How does that come into play? What about Social Security? When's the ideal time to turn that on? You start to go down that rabbit hole, and that's where overwhelming feelings can come in to play. That's why I think if we start with something simple, know our numbers, our income, our assets, our expenses, any liabilities that are left behind, then look at the time phrase of the phrase of what do we want to do with our time in retirement? Again, any activities that require expense? How much expense? Well, we're going to do some traveling. Okay, that's not good enough for me. So what do you mean by some traveling? Right? Are we going to take a cruise? Are we going to head to Alaska? Or are we going to just take some road trips to go see the grandkids? So we want to identify those different types of activities, not from the standpoint of being judgmental about what we're going to do, but what's it going to cost us to do those activities? Because if we're going to have a spending plan for all the things that we need to live off of, why not have a spending plan for the things that we want to do in retirement, like travel, like volunteer, taking up hobbies, whatever we need to do that's going to take some time off our hands and maybe require putting some gas in the car to get to the place we want to volunteer, or if we want to take up some golf, if we want to travel. The whole point of it is, let's start with you knowing our numbers, and then we can kind of build it from there. So that's why I would encourage everybody. Number one, don't think that you're doing this all by yourself. You're not alone. This is a journey that everybody's walking through. It's a foreign language. We've never been down this path before. And by all means, understand that you don't have to walk the journey by yourself. That's why we're here. And we all start with a conversation. So we'd love to share that concept and walk through that conversation with anybody who's listening today.
And how can they reach you?
They can reach us a couple different ways. By phone, our phone number is area code 309-291-0491. They can see us on the internet and learn a lot about us and have some access to some great resources out there. If they simply go to www.thewhisleragency.com. Again, there's no T in Whisler, so simply it's spelled Whisler. And then if they want to contact me directly through email, they can reach me at tim@thewhisleragency.com.
All right, ladies, and of course, gentlemen, too. Tim is here if you have questions, and no judgment either. And follow this podcast. Please share with others as well. I'm Patrice Sikora, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for listening to License to Spend. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The views expressed herein reflect the views of the Whisler Agency. As of the date of publication, these views may change as conditions change. The views expressed herein are not intended and should not be construed as investment advice, and they do not address any individual's specific situation. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the Whisler Agency. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advisory and financial planning services are offered through Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Insurance, consulting, and education services are offered through the Whisler Agency. The Whisler Agency is a separate and unaffiliated entity from Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC. This podcast is designed to provide general information on subjects covered pursuant to IRS Circular 230. It is not intended to provide specific legal or tax advice and cannot be used to avoid penalties or to promote, market, or recommend any tax plan or arrangement for insurance products, discuss guarantees, or backed by the financial strength and claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance company.